Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. I know a few of you are still looking for seats. We have quite a number of empty ones over there. Good evening, and thank you for being here this evening. My name is Lillian Polis-Gerstner, and welcome to the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. On behalf of our CEO, Susan Abrams, our Board of Trustees, our Board of Directors, all of my fellow colleagues on our professional staff, and our many, many hundreds of volunteers, we're so pleased that you could be here this evening. Tonight is one of our very special top 10 events. As most of you know, we have recently marked the museum's 10th anniversary. The exact date, yes, thank you. We opened the doors to the museum in which you are currently seated on April 19th, 2009. And it is almost inconceivable to me that 10 years have sped by as quickly as they have. We have a world of achievements behind us, and I think a universe of achievements ahead of us. So thank you for being a part of this evening. Thank you for being a part of what the museum attempts to do and what the museum will indeed achieve in the time to come. I want to give a special thanks for this evening's program to our community partners. In the first place, we have the Consulate General of the Netherlands in Chicago, and it's my great honor to indicate to you that we have Consul General Louis Piet here representing the Netherlands. We're also grateful to have the community partnership of Hidden Children Chicago, a group of children whose survival during the Holocaust was due to righteous individuals who took them in when it was no longer safe for them to be Jewish out in the open. That group is headed by Olga Weiss. I don't know whether Olga is here tonight, but she leads that group, Hidden Children Chicago. And I'd also like to thank our community partner. Yes, thank you. I'd like to thank the Holocaust Educational Foundation of Northwestern University, directed by Dr. Sarah Cushman. They too have been instrumental in letting people know about this evening's program. We have a great deal to get to, but I would be remiss if I did not remind our members in the room, whose hands are going to go up now so that you have a chance to exercise them. If you're a member, please raise your hand. Thank you. I'm going to remind our members, and I'm going to inform those of you who are now about to raise your hands as being first-time visitors, that we have many more programs coming up this month of June. We have options for you on June the 13th, June the 16th, June the 20th, and June the 30th. So let it not be said that there's not a reason to return. Please come back and see us. We have information about these upcoming programs in our quarterly calendar of events. You will find copies of that upstairs. We want to begin this evening with an opportunity to experience the creativity of young people. Since the theme of tonight's program is celebrating what would have been Anne Frank's 90th birthday. She would have turned 90 next week on June the 12th. It seems appropriate and for us entirely fitting to allow you to experience the creativity and wonderment of creation from a group of students from University of Chicago's laboratory schools. These students will perform now under the direction of their teacher, Francisco Dean, of the music department.
Good evening. As adults, it's our responsibility to teach and mentor children, yet we can learn so much from them as well. There were countless heroes of the Holocaust, and as it turns out, tonight is about honoring the heroes that were children. Anne Frank was a child with profoundness beyond her years, and from her diary we are taught life lessons that will echo for an eternity. It is an honor to be here with you all this evening, to share with you a work that has at its core the writings of 3 additional children of the Holocaust, 3 manuscripts that also reveal profoundness beyond their years, 3 manuscripts with life lessons that echo for an eternity. This composition is the result of a special collaboration with the Illinois Holocaust Museum, and we'll begin with the behind-the-scenes featurette to give you a deeper appreciation of what you'll hear tonight.
Hours, days, weeks, months, 6 months. That's a lot of time for just 10 minutes of art. That's insane. I mean, who does that?
We do.
We do. I used to be dismissive about electronic music. I didn't respect the singular musician who sat at a computer and created an entire album with 0 human interaction. Then I realized I hadn't been checking out the right people. Here at Lab, it's a pretty diverse mix of cultures. Our Jewish Student Association hosts a Holocaust assembly every other year, and musical performances are included. I asked the JSA if they'd be open to our electronic music ensemble performing. I thought we could make a different contribution, something unique using technology, since that's what the group is all about. They said they thought that'd be great. So music for an electronic ensemble is pretty tricky. There's no music store we can go to buy all of our arrangements. So everything that we do, we have to create from scratch. I started brainstorming ideas. At the time, I really just thought I'd compose something like I'd done so many times before. That was before I met Ali Mobs. It's a process known as sound design. Ali was doing a workshop on it where we went out into the city and recorded any sounds we wanted. Traffic, crunching a plastic bottle, stepping on leaves, tapping a metal gate, literally anything. I thought I was just going on this workshop to find a way to create an exotic drum kit. He was showing us that, but it was far more than that. We were taking these sounds and creating full-on instruments. These instruments were created literally just from these field recordings. No additives, no preservatives. It was just pure frequencies from everyday life. Before the workshop with Ali, I was already thinking about the piece I was writing. But then I thought, what if every instrument sound you heard came from field recordings captured from actual artifacts of the Holocaust? The Illinois Holocaust Museum is up the road from Chicago, so I reached out to Kelly Zaney, the museum's director of education. I was already cringing, ready for the rejection before I even finished asking for permission. I was blown away when she called me back and said yes. In the collaboration with the Illinois Holocaust Museum, I worked closely with their collections manager, Emily Mooney. There were thousands of pieces in their archive. I wanted to try and find as much diversity of materials as I could. Wooden artifacts, metal ones, paper, fabric. There was so much there. People think of the obvious sources for musical notes, a piano, trumpet, the human singing voice. But in reality, those are just frequencies, polished and refined directly at the source. What most people don't realize is that every sound is a frequency.
In the actual museum space, there is a Nazi rail car that was used to transport prisoners to the various camps. And so here's an example of some of those sounds. And so I took one of those and ended up creating this bass instrument that you hear in the second movement.
It can be a lengthy process. It takes time to shape these frequencies into a sound that you want to use. So each of these instruments is really a sonic sculpture from the raw frequencies collected from each of these artifacts. What made it meaningful was that these weren't just artifacts. Many of the pieces had stories behind them. I asked Emily if the museum had any documents or letters with special significance. she shared one. A letter written by a woman named Rennie Valhaus. It's the last letter she would ever write, a farewell to her family. She's just learned that she and her son Alfred are about to be sent to Auschwitz, soon after they were both killed there. I use this letter as part of the narrative of my piece. It's the transition from the first to second movements. Rennie was portrayed by Marion Zimmel, one of our German teachers here at Lab. Because the letter was typed, the coincidence that a typewriter was one of the museum's artifacts was fate, I think. The typing you hear in the piece is from this typewriter.
It's been an amazing experience being a part of this project. Just the idea that someone would take artifacts from the Holocaust and be able to turn that into sound and recreate an experience of the different stages of the Holocaust was amazing to me. We went through and we did a line-by-line analysis, and then finally we broke it down into something that sounded like what a speaker of English would say in that exact context.
So became lost against the nächsten Weg, verschieden mit Beinen, verstellen wurde Tag.
Another meaningful discovery was learning about a man named Jerry Glass. Jerry was a Chicagoan born to Yiddish-speaking Jewish parents. At 17, he joined the U.S. Army and served under General Patton. Jerry's unit was one of the many that landed at Omaha Beach as part of the Normandy invasion of World War II. Several days later, he was part of the liberation of the Mauthausen concentration camp. He acted as a translator for the Jewish prisoners who only spoke Yiddish. The museum has several of Jerry's belongings. The marching army you hear in the piece were samples taken from Jerry's army boot. There's also his army jacket. I used the sound of the zipper pull to create one of the main melodic synth instruments you hear in the third movement, and his uniform pants. I created another synth lead from the sound of the fabric rubbing against itself. The poem I Am a Jew is the resolve and fortitude, the resilience of the Jewish people.
A poem like this, coming from someone who lived through that experience and then died from it, really hammers home and sort of opens up to us a way of understanding what that was like and why we can't let it happen again.
As a Jew, I'm able to have the honor and the task of conveying the feelings and the emotions of real people who went through these very harrowing experiences. And I get to feel some of what they feel, and I get to show the world and Lab how these people might have felt going into concentration camps and leaving their families behind, and the pride that they have from their heritage and their background.
I think it's been very powerful, especially the poem that Eva wrote.
No, no, my God, we want to live, not watch our numbers melt away. We want to have a better world. We want to work. We must not die.
Against the nächsten Weg, verschieden mit Beinen, verstellen wurde Tag. Kommen weg durch unsere ausgebänkte Schau. Später heute unser Tag mit seinen Dawn.
2, 2, 3, 4.
I am a Jew.
I am a Jew.
That's
It will be.
That's everybody. Letter N, full ensemble. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Letter N is in Nancy? Okay.
This method of music creating has given the students in the ensemble a deeper connection to everything. They've been so focused in rehearsal. The execution of all the parts feels at times like a three-ring circus. They have to play melodies, chords, improvise, trigger audio samples, launch loops. These kids are amazing. Without them, this piece doesn't live.
I always knew the Holocaust was a terrible, terrible thing, but especially in reading some of the very minute details in the poetry from the people that are actually experiencing it, I saw the more individual experience of the Holocaust. It wasn't just numbers, but these were people, and you get to hear their stories. From the letters to the poems, I saw a different side of the Holocaust I'd never seen before.
When you're in the electronic music ensemble, I feel like there's a lot more creativity. Maybe it's because we're more of a club rather than a class, but I feel like we have more movement and we have more say in what we're doing.
All these wires, gadgets, buttons, sliders, knobs. There are a ton of lessons that being in a technology discipline provides. The one you better embrace first?
Troubleshooting. Troubleshooting. Troubleshooting.
Throughout this entire creative process, I kept thinking, it's really important to get this right, to do it justice. I can't do it justice. No one can. So this piece is really just me trying to say to history, I hear you. I'm listening. I want to respond to you, and this is the best way I know how.
This is something my family went through, and this is something that many other families went through, and so many different groups of people who have been discriminated against have gone through. And I think that this experience gave me the outlet to express how close I am to my heritage, and that is something I would never have had the chance to do otherwise.
I am a Jew, and will be a Jew forever, ever, 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 ever.
So Frühling liegt unbesiegt, as the spring unconquered, takes its title from the admiration of those who have overcome oppression with steadfast resolve and continue to press forward. Resilience is defined as the capacity to recover, the ability to spring back into shape. As a physical object, a spring is coiled, and after being compressed, springs back to its original shape. This led to my thinking of spring as a season. With its splendor of color and blooming of leaves and flowers, in the yearly cycle there is winter, but no matter how hard, cold, or brutal winter is, spring always follows. This season's spring in this work represents the Jewish people. Despite everything horrific about the Holocaust, the winter and the symbolism, the people have endured and are still here, unconquered. This piece is in 3 movements, broadly traversing 3 periods demarcated by the Holocaust. Each movement is interpreted through a poem written by children who were prisoners at the Theresian camp. Bird Song, written anonymously, marks the time before the Holocaust. Fear, written by Eva Pikova, gives a sobering account of the Holocaust itself through her eyes. And I Am a Jew, written by Franta Boss, stands as a call to defiance against tyranny. We hope you enjoy the performance.
Bird song.
blackbird sings her holly bush during the dawning after night. Then I know how fine it is to live.
Try to open up your heart to beauty. Go to the woods someday and weave a wreath of memory there. Then, if the tears obscure your way, you'll know how wonderful it is to be alive.
Meine Geliebten, my dearest loved ones, it is with great difficulty that I write you this farewell letter. If you are receiving this letter, it means I could not say goodbye to you in person. Our fate was hopeless. I thought Alfred and I would see you again, but our fate has been decided. Aber versucht doch, uns auf. Do try to find us. Perhaps God is watching over us. Vergesst uns nicht. Don't forget us. Bis zuletzt. I will think of you until my final hour. Grüße euch. I send you my deepest embrace. And I continue with kindness to love you. And I continue to love you. And send my hand my deepest embrace. And I continue to love you. And I continue to love you.
imagine this? To die today?
No, no, my God, we want to live, not watch our numbers melt away. We want to have a better world. We want to work. We must not die.
I am a Jew. I will never be ashamed. I will never be ashamed. I am a Jew. Glory to God. I am a Jew.
A Jew forever, Jew forever.
I am a Jew forever. Proud. I will never be ashamed.
Never say that you have reached the very end. Because the hour we have hungered for is near, and our marching steps firm, we are here. Because the hour we have hungered for is near, and our marching steps firm, we are here.
I am a Jew and will be a Jew forever. Even if I should die from hunger, never will I submit. I will always fight for my people on my honor. I will never be ashamed of them. I give my word. I am proud of my dignified name. Even though I am suppressed, I will always come back to life. I am a Jew. I am a Jew. And will be a Jew forever. And will be a Jew forever. Even if I should die from hunger. Even if I should die from hunger. Never will I submit. Never will I submit. I will always fight for my people. I will always fight for my people. On my honor. I will never be ashamed of them. I will never be ashamed of them. I give my word. I give my word. I am proud of my people. I am proud of my people. How dignified they are. How dignified they are. Even though I am suppressed. Even though I am suppressed. I will always come back to life. I will always come back to life. I am a Jew. 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 I will always come back to life. I will always come back to life.
I am a Jew.
There's a reason one cannot help but be inspired by young people. Or another round of applause for these students. And special thanks to Mr. Francisco Dean, their teacher. Our keynote speaker for this evening's program, Ronald Leopold, the executive director of the Anne Frank House, was born in Groningen in 1960. He read history at the University of Groningen from 1978 to 1985 and wrote his master's thesis in Budapest. After graduating, he held various posts at the Dutch General Pension Fund for Public Employees. Among other things, he was involved in the implementation of the legislation regarding war victims. In 1990, he switched to the Pensions and Benefits Council, which he headed from 2006 onwards. He has been executive director, of the Anne Frank House since the 1st of January 2011. Mr. Leopold lives in Amsterdam with his wife and daughter, and it's my great pleasure to invite him to come up to speak to us this evening. You can use this one.
Okay. I don't know what the rest. No. The Dutch at all. Good evening, everybody. Dear friends, still under the spell of this wonderful music. I was very impressed by it, especially to see that young people are engaged in the work we're all doing. I feel was very moving. I will say a few words about that also tonight. But please allow me to begin by expressing my sincere thanks for the invitation to say a few words here tonight on the occasion, yes, of Anne Frank's 90th birthday and the Anne Frank Month initiated by your organization to mark this anniversary. And it's really my sincere hope. It's my first time here in this wonderful museum. I'm very impressed. I got it, I think, the quickest tour someone ever had here. But it's really very, very impressive, thought-provoking, and it's really my sincere hope that the intermittent contacts we have had over the past years, I look at Susan, that we will expand those contacts and that we will continue our collaboration in the upcoming years. After all, we have so much in common. Just like you, we're also a museum and an educational organization that links the remembrance of the Holocaust to the present and especially, of course, to the future. And I'm going to address particularly the letter later this evening. But before doing that, I'd like to take you back a little bit in time. And not to Anne's birthday, but to someone else's birthday first. Victor Kugler's, 119 years ago today. Perhaps his name doesn't ring a bell with everybody here, especially if you read one of the earlier releases of the diary. He appears there as Harry Kraler. Harry Kraler, you might pronounce that Dutch name. The pseudonym Anne Frank gave him and that her father was faithful to when he arranged the publication of the diary after the war. It was only in the 1990s, after the release of a critical edition of Anne's diary, was his real name again bestowed on him. And there is more ambiguity related to Victor Kugler. For example, uncertainty about his birthday. His baptismal book indicates June 5th, but in the civil registry of his birthplace, it was Hohenelbe, it's now in the Czech Republic. The date June 6th is noted. But I'm happy to take advantage of the fact that in the Czech Republic, it is already June 6th, while here in Chicago, it's still June 5th. So when I say it's his birthday, I'm right either way. Victor Kugler was one of Otto Frank's 4 employees who helped the 8 inhabitants of the secret annex for the more than 2 years they were in hiding. That was a risky business. there were severe penalties for assisting Jews in hiding. And this is why, after the war, Otto Frank, the only one of those who were in hiding who eventually survived the war, rightfully recommended that Israel honor Victor Kugler as one of the righteous among the nations. Exactly 75 years ago today, Anne Frank briefly wrote about Victor Kugler's 44th birthday in her diary. But it's hardly a fair description. In fact, June 5th is a very stressful day in the secret annex. Her entry begins, I quote, "New problems in the annex," unquote. There is disagreement about whether a spice cake should be baked for Kugler, given the people in hiding have so little to eat themselves. There's a quarrel about the division of butter. The weather is bad. The cat is doing her business outside the litter box. There are very few potatoes and veggies left. One loaf of bread is moldy. What are we going to live on next month is how the entry ends. But what a difference a day makes. The next day begins with a news announcement from the BBC radio that the Allied invasion has begun. This is the day. At first, they believe it's a trial landing. But then soon it becomes clear it's the real invasion. And Anne writes, I quote, "A huge commotion in the annex. Is this really the beginning of the long-awaited liberation?" Unquote. Hopeful days follow in the secret annex. Anne's sister, we say Margot, we use the French pronunciation, but of course she was a German girl, Margot. Anne's sister Margot is already speculating about the possibility of returning to school in the fall. And in this cheerful atmosphere, it's Anne who celebrates her 15th birthday 1 week later on June 12th. And despite the difficult circumstances, she is showered with gifts. Her father and mother, who had delighted her 2 years earlier with the Red Check diary, now give her an illustrated botany book. I have to tell you a little bit about this botany book because miracles happen. As you just heard from Lillian, I was appointed in 2011 as the director of the Anne Frank House, and it was only 1 year later, in 2012, that I got a phone call from a renowned auction house in the Netherlands, and they said, "Mr. Leopold, we have something that might be of interest to you." And I said, "What is it?" "Well," he said, "I don't want to say that over the phone, so please come and see what we have here." So I went there with one of my staff the next day, and I went into kind of a boardroom, and on the table was a botany book. And this owner of the auction house told me, he said, "Open it." And I opened it, and with a fountain pen, on the last page, Anne Frank, June 12, 1944, het achterhuis, the Dutch word for the secret annex. And I was completely in shock. And first, of course, we thought it's a fake, because that's what you think. You don't believe in miracles, so you think it's a fake. So we had it forensically researched. Ink samples were taken of that, and here you go. It was the last present on her last birthday she got of her parents that was there on the table. It's now in our collection. It's now in our archives. So miracles do happen. The Botany Book of Anne. Her 15th birthday, as I said, it would also be her last. Not much later, fate or Nazis intervene. On August the 4th, 1944, a raid takes place in the building at 263 Prinsengracht, in which all 8 people in hiding and the 2 male helpers, one of them Victor Kugler, are arrested. The people in hiding are deported via the Westerbork transit camp in the east of the Netherlands to Auschwitz. It was actually on the last train that left the Netherlands for Auschwitz, September 3, 1944. and from there to various concentration camps. Of the 8, only Anne's father Otto ultimately survived the war. The others perished under inhumane conditions. Anne and her sister Margot succumbed to typhus in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp mid-February 1945, 2 months before the camp was liberated. Victor Kugler was sent to the Amersfoort penal camp, but he benefited from the fact that Germany desperately needed slave laborers during the final phase of the war. He was forced to work several places in the Netherlands and managed to escape just a few days before the liberation and therefore survived the war. Anne and Margot Frank are just 2 of almost 18,000 Jewish children who were deported from the Netherlands to be killed in extermination and concentration camps. They remain in our hearts forever, along with the other victims of the Shoah, as we softly speak their names. Anne Frank, Margot Frank, Zichronom Levracha, may their memory be a blessing. The emptiness left by the loss of so many lives, so many young lives, is no longer as apparent as it once was. The wheels of history roll on, new generations are born, new realities arise. Houses once emptied have been filled again by the tide of history, with new occupants going about their everyday lives more than 75 years later. As a visitor to Amsterdam today, it will be very difficult to break through the beauty of the city to feel the loss lingering just behind the facades. Yet, there is one place where the emptiness is clearly visible today. It's the secret annex on Prinsengracht. Because of Anne Frank's diary, it's probably the world's most famous empty space, despite its many visitors it receives. We welcome 1.3 million visitors every year. There isn't all that much to see, and you won't be overwhelmed with facts about the Shoah there. In essence, the meaning of the secret annex lies exactly in its emptiness. First and foremost, this emptiness, of course, reflects the absence of Anne Frank. Her diary can be seen there in the house where she hid and in which it was written, as a silent messenger of a life cut short. The emptiness also reflects the gaping wound left in the life of her father Otto, who had lost his entire family. While the diary of his youngest daughter gave him a new purpose in life, the immense loss would never leave him. And of course, the emptiness of the secret annex also represents all the other empty spaces where those who fell victim to Nazi persecution once lived. But the meaning of the Anne Frank house goes further than the tragedy in which it is rooted. The house also forms a mirror in which we can see ourselves. Not to admire our beauty, not like in the fairy tale, mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all, but to be confronted with who we are, what we as human beings are capable of, what the values are that make us human. The fate of Anne and Margot Frank was the work of human hands. It was not the result of a natural disaster. It was not the work of creatures from another planet. It was not even the work of one particular type of person. We invite visitors to the Anne Frank house to reflect on this and challenge to ask themselves questions, often uncomfortable questions, concerning our moral compass. Questions about the choices we make every day that have huge consequences for ourselves, for our own lives, and that of others. About the need to protect ourselves against ourselves. Otto Frank remarked shortly before the Anne Frank House opened to the public in 1960, and I quote Otto, "We should stop teaching history lessons and should start teaching the lessons from history," unquote. Now, I don't assert we should stop teaching history lessons, but his intrinsic message was, I think, very clear. History lessons are of little use if they don't also serve as a mirror for our own actions. The question for institutions like yours and mine, of course, is, what are those lessons from history? What is the relevance of the Holocaust in the 21st century for generations whose grandparents and oftentimes great-grandparents were born after the war? Aren't the circumstances and events of the past too distant from us? Can they still have a guiding significance in 2019 and beyond? Or do we soon lose ourselves in slogans, banal comparisons, platitudes that sound good but can no longer serve as a moral compass? It was a well-known Dutch historian who once said that history has nothing to teach us, but does give us a lot of food for thought. It's a rather bold statement, especially from a historian, but also an engaging one, I feel. History helps us in the search for the significance of the past in light of the many differences and a handful of similarities with the present. It prevents us from putting historical and contemporary developments and circumstances on par with each other. But it doesn't stop there. History gives us food for thought, not so much because it repeats itself, but because it offers a view of what lies behind human think and actions. What motivated people to think and act the way they did? What were the considerations that they weighed? How do they explain their own time? And how do we perceive it in hindsight? Through our organizations, you and I try to explain our social and political developments of today in the light of what happened in the lead up and during the Holocaust. I do this with an increasing sense of urgency and uneasiness. What are the driving forces behind today's growing social divide? Behind the increasingly freer use of words and ideas that were completely taboo until not so long ago. Behind the dissemination and gradual social acceptability of ways of thinking that are all too familiar from history. How do we interpret the images on posters placed by a government of an EU member state, Hungary, depicting the Jewish Hungarian businessman and philanthropist George Soros as a threat to the Hungarian people and the Christian Hungarian nation? A thinly disguised reference to Nazi propaganda in the 1930s. Anyone who has thought about World War II and the Holocaust inevitably comes up with the question of how things have gone so far. At what moment might history have taken a different turn? Historians have written libraries full about this, and undoubtedly there will be much more written. But in 2019, I feel this question also raises a very urgent contemporary dilemma related to democratic vigilance. What do we see and hear around us today? How do we read our own time now? How do we interpret the risks? Are we slipping away? Are we losing control of developments? Is our open democratic society, the rule of law, which we rebuilt with so much care in the shadow of the Holocaust, in danger? Has the world lost its way? Are we en route to new tragedies? We hear language and see images that distinctly reminds us of those years. No longer coming from marginal groups on the fringe of society or from the darkest corners of the internet, but displayed on billboards along the road. We find them on the opinion pages of serious newspapers. They're expounded in the election campaigns of very successful politicians. Surely it will not happen to us again in a relatively short span of time that we miss the moment to turn the tide of history, that we let the window to act pass us by while the warning lights of the past flash brighter and brighter, that we will make the same mistake twice. I don't know about you, but whenever I reflect on history and think about the social developments nowadays, I feel more and more uncomfortable. The democratic constitutional state, the open societies built up in the shadow of the war in so many European countries, sometimes after decades of oppression. The kinds of societies in which power is controlled and limited by independent institutions, in which citizens in their great diversity are not only equal under the law but also treated equally, in which politicians not only attempt to realize their own ideals but take the ideals in the interest of all into account, in which citizens realize they are part of a greater community of people with very different beliefs, backgrounds, and yes, value systems, and act accordingly. These societies, I feel, are increasingly under threat. Freedom House, an independent organization based here in the US, in Washington, D.C., monitors the development of freedom and democracy in the world, notes for the 13th consecutive year that freedom and democracy are declining worldwide. And I quote from the report, "The democratic erosion seen among free countries is concentrated in consolidated democracy, those that were rated free from 1985 through 2005, the 20-year period before the 13-year decline," unquote. I think these are more than disturbing findings. And all of this after we have said to ourselves for years, certainly at commemorations, that freedom and democracy must not be taken for granted, that you must care for them and sometimes fight for them. We've told ourselves over and over again that we must be vigilant, that the ghosts of the past don't vanish just like that anti-Semitism, racism, and discrimination are of all times. But as the distance from the present to World War II and the ill-fated 1930s has increased for most of us today, and certainly for a younger generation, the messages have become a bit of a cliché. It has become unthinkable that the achievements following 1945 would not last forever. The end of history, Francis Fukuyama rejoiced in an essay from the year in which the already rusting Iron Curtain went to the scrap heap in 1989. But history has hit back hard and forced us to think again, to think and to act. Because these societies that we so passionately believe in are not simple societies, certainly not in times of radical changes like ours. These societies must stand firm against ideas that appeal to fear, that promise certainty, that put their own people first above equality. They must stand their ground in the discord created by radical voices who primarily spout off at the mouth for the benefit of particular interest groups or about how right they are. They must survive in a world dominated by the pursuit of power instead rather than the pursuit of humanity. They must endure amidst an exploding media landscape in which just about every citizen seems to have its own press agency in its own bubble. It's time to leave complacency behind us, to stand up and to defend our societies. Here in Chicago, I'd like to quote President Obama. He wrote, I quote, "Dream big dreams" in the Amsterdam High School's 100th anniversary book during his visit to the Netherlands in 2014. Dreams about the kind of world they want to live in. Dreams about a world where people are treated equally. Dreams about a world where the color of your skin doesn't matter, or whether you're a Christian, a Muslim, Jew. Dreams about a world where hatred has made way for the profound awareness that we are all part of one big community, living together with people who are oftentimes very, very different from us. Anne Frank dreamed of such a world while cooped up in the darkness of her hiding place in Amsterdam. She confided her dreams to her diary. "I hope you will be a great source of comfort and support," she wrote in the first sentence of her diary, still unaware of how important this support would prove to be in the more than 2 years that followed. We can only speculate about her thoughts during the last months of her young life in Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. Was she able to hold on to her dreams and ideals in a situation of increasing hopelessness? Did she still believe that, quote, "people are truly good at heart," unquote, as she had written in her diary a short time before the arrest? Did she gaze at the sky like she had earlier done through the attic window of the hiding place and think everything is going to turn out all right? 16 years ago, the year 1963, in the shadow of the Lincoln Memorial, Dr. Martin Luther King articulated his dream of freedom and human dignity, of the unalienable rights of every individual to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He continued to dream, to believe that what he called the Bank of Justice wasn't bankrupt, despite the difficulties of today and tomorrow. Just a few years earlier, in 1959, Dr. King was among the honored guests at the motion picture premiere of The Diary of Anne Frank in New York. Anne and Dr. King were of the same generation, born in 1929, only a few months apart. With their dreams and their tragic fates, both left an indelible mark on history. The dreams expressed by Anne Frank and by Dr. King implore us to think about who we are and who we want to be, about the world in which we live and the one we want to live in, about the things that make us human. Their life stories serve as a warning and as a source of inspiration, as a guide to achieving a better world, a better future. I feel it's very important to realize that Anne Frank's short life began in 1929 in a free democratic country and ended a mere 15 years later in a world of total barbarism. This malevolence did not begin with the outbreak of the Second World War. It began in the early 1930s. It began much earlier than that. And of course, a lot can be said about the vulnerability of the fledgling German democracy during the Weimar Republic. But it was a country that was highly civilized, had produced great literature and music, and was gradually developing into a democratic constitutional state in which many Jews felt as German as they did Jewish. With the establishment of a strong anti-Semitic Nazi dictatorship, made Jews living in Germany question whether they could stay. We always ask students actually whether they know, in our education work, whether they know how many Jews lived in Germany in 1932. And they often come up with incredible numbers, like 20%, 30%, sometimes more than half of the population was Jewish in 1932. I don't know if you know the answer. We're not going to make a quiz out of it. It's a 0.8% of the total population. The question whether they should stay must have been inconceivable for families who had lived on German territory for centuries, who felt connected to the country, to the language, to the culture, who had fought for their homeland a short time earlier during World War I. No, I don't believe that we are facing the same inconceivable question at this very moment. But I do believe there is every reason to be more vigorously defend our societies and the rule of law. And I'm convinced that organizations like ours can and must make an important contribution to this. Because these societies are the best way to fend off new tragedies, to protect ourselves against ourselves. We have endeavored for years to combat anti-Semitism, racism, and discrimination within the framework of democracy and the rule of law. But now those frameworks themselves are under attack. I therefore call on us to focus more on strengthening those frameworks, on stimulating and supporting the basic principles with which we negotiate our sometimes large differences. We will not only have to identify the values that bind us, but also develop an ability to address what divides us. We will have to redefine what democratic thinking means in the 21st century and how we can develop it in the shadow of the memory of the Shoah, and especially what preceded it. How we can keep our communities sustainable amidst the major challenges presented by a world that seems to be becoming more and more dangerous. How, in the interest of that community and therefore of ourselves, can we build relationships with those who differ or appear to differ from us? How we can open ourselves to one another, how we can try to understand each other. The 16th president of your wonderful country, Abraham Lincoln, once said, and I quote Lincoln, "I don't like that man, I must get to know him better," unquote. Wise words spoken by a wise man who still has a lot to teach us. For organizations that are committed worldwide to keeping the memory of the Shoah alive, I see this as the most important task in the coming years, ensuring that our democratic constitutional states continue to function well. This requires not only a foundation of common values, but also skills and competences that enable us to deal with our differences at schools, in sport clubs, the villages, towns, and cities where we live, nationwide, worldwide. And there is something else that I find essential for the future of our organizations. We've been speaking for many years about the consequences of the gradual disappearance of the generation of survivors, of those who experienced the Holocaust firsthand and who have touched us by sharing their painful experiences and memories. Only a few of them are still alive, and of course, we very much hope to keep them with us for as long as possible. But at the same time, our visitors are increasingly young people whose grandparents were born after the war. Thanks to modern technology, and we've just experienced a wonderful example of it, and the museum, as far as I could see it during those 25 minutes that I've been touring here, have a lot of great examples of that. For example, the holograms that you might have seen here. For example, with Eva Schloss, stepsister of Anne Frank. Thanks to that technology, we're still able to share the memories of survivors with this new generation. But contemporary relevance is determined in the context of their everyday lives. And it's the question I ask, whether our type of organizations, mine included, have and maintain enough of a connection with this contemporary everyday context of this fourth and fifth generation. It might be better if we took their context as a starting point for Holocaust-related educational experiences instead of pushing history lessons. We should engage them as our most important target group. Young people. Perhaps the term target group is also somewhat erroneous. Perhaps we should no longer see them as a target group for whom we organize activities. Perhaps we've seen an example of that just a few minutes ago, we should, I feel, invite them to become part of our organizations in one form or another. I think it's better to no longer see them as visitors or participants of educational activities. I feel they should become co-owners and co-partners of our organizations. They could help us fulfill our missions and could accordingly build the world of their dreams. They could help us fulfill our missions. They offer us new perspectives, which are accompanied by new connotations. Let's therefore consider how we can actively involve young people in our work, in our organizations. Let's make place for them among us. Let's listen to them and let's welcome them with open arms. It is my experience that there are many, many very talented and committed young people, sometimes incredibly young actually, but that's maybe my perspective has become older and older, from who we can learn really a lot. With this in mind, I return at the end of my talk to Anne Frank. Since the first publication of the Diary of Anne Frank in 1947, it has been read by millions of young people around the world. In the words she penned, they hear the voice of someone their age, a peer. Her dreams are their dreams. I'm going to take you back to April 11, 1944. It's a lovely spring day in Amsterdam. It's a clear blue sky. It's almost 70 degrees outside. A mild breeze is blowing. A long, bitter cold winter is finally giving way to the first warmth of the year. Trees are budding. It will not be long before they are in full bloom. It's a day full of yearning for everything that has been missing for so long. The warm rays of the sun on your skin, fresh air, the smell of nature awakening. Anne is at her desk in the musty annex, and she's writing one of the longest and, in my opinion, most moving entries in the diary. A break-in downstairs in the building makes her once again realize that she's in hiding, makes her think about being Jewish and what that means to her. She's scared, but determined to be brave and strong. She is ready for death, but wants to live. She wants to make her mark on the world. She reflects on who she is and who she wants to be. A Jew, Dutch, a woman with inner strength, goal, opinions, religion, love. If only I can be myself, I'll be satisfied, she writes. With these simple words, Anne Frank reveals something very personal to us. On that beautiful spring day, she doesn't share with us an identity claim. She shares with us the desire for space and the freedom to discover and to develop herself. She's been locked up in a small space with 7 others for more than 2 years, continually discovering herself, but always realizing that she is part of a group of people who are dependent on each other. As time passes, her capacity of self-reflection and her ability to place herself in someone else's shoes grows. Time and again she wonders if what she did or said was correct, or, in hindsight, maybe she was wrong after all. She tries to imagine how she comes across to the others, and she's not afraid to judge herself harshly. She's curious about other people. She has an open mind, is at the same time confident and insecure. She wants to make her voice heard. She has strong opinions, but is also very vulnerable and prepared to change her point of view, even if this is oftentimes easier said than done. Each time she asks herself questions and presents herself with dilemmas. And she realizes if she must get along with the 7 other inhabitants of the secret annex, that she sometimes has to comply with their wishes. The very, very last sentence of Anne Frank's diary speaks volumes. I quote, "I keep on trying to find a way to become what I'd like to be and what I could be if only there were no other people in the world," unquote. But other people live there as well. If only I can be myself. Like in the diary, not as an identity claim, but as an individual desire and as a democratic endeavor to ensure that everyone has the opportunity and freedom to discover and develop themselves, while keeping in mind that other people live in the world. Whoever reads Anne Frank's diary cannot help but think about the dilemmas this presents, about what kind of attitudes and abilities are required of us. This isn't going to give us the best of all possible worlds, in the words of the French philosopher Voltaire. But hopefully it will spare us the hell that Anne Frank, Margot Frank, and millions of others were forced to endure. They were not only prohibited from being their true selves, but from being at all. Thank you. I'm sorry. It is, of course, also the 10th anniversary of this wonderful institution. So when you're invited to a party, you bring gifts. And the Dutch always open gifts right away if you get them, and I unwrap them even when I give them. That's not usual. That's actually not very common in Holland either. So. But I really would like to take the opportunity to give you, Susan, something I brought from Amsterdam. and I'm going to show you it in a minute. In 1954, 6 years before the Anne Frank House opened to the museum, a young photographer, Jewish photographer, herself having survived the war in hiding, she was called Maria Österreicher, but became known as a photographer under the name of Maria Austria. She went in 1954 into the secret annex together with Anne's father and took pictures. And one of those pictures is of the window on the attic, I just mentioned it, where Anne used to sit at the end with her boyfriend. Maybe you remember, with Peter. You know, they went up to the attic and sat under this window. And she wrote beautiful lines. If you have the diary of Anne Frank, please read tonight, February 23, 1944, when she sits under that window with her boyfriend, and they are under the spell of the beauty of a beautiful morning in Amsterdam. They couldn't speak a word. So I thought, it was a window of hope for Anne, actually. And as this institution, with the support of all you here present, are giving hope to so many people here in this area, I thought it was appropriate to present you with this, I feel, hauntingly beautiful picture of the annex.
What an incredible evening, starting with the remarkable musical program from our young people in the community who you have reflected on their incredible talents and value and how we must bring them in and let them help us lead from these very young ages. So very wise words. I also want to say, Ronald, that you mentioned that there is so much to learn from history. Our history gives us a lot to think about, and you tonight have given us so much to think about, and you have given it to us as just a remarkable gift. It was lyrical to me, the way you presented your thoughts, the way you wrapped from Anne Frank to history to some of our great leaders in this country and throughout the world, and just gave us the most remarkable challenge in how we go forward, and ideas that we will, I'm sure, continue to turn over for days and months and years. And it's an honor to have you here this evening and to be able to share your wise words with our audience. And I'm sure they will be like a ripple of hope that another one of our presidents and leaders has, or not presidents, our Attorney General has, Robert Kennedy has spoken of, and that ripple from all of us hearing your wise words tonight will continue out into the world, hopefully magnifying good for all of us. So I just want to say thank you to you, and we do have, as a little token of our appreciation, a gift. If you would like, you may open, or I can just simply go ahead. I'm going to hold this, though, so nothing happens. Okay, if you're... and I can just clue in folks. These are some books from our museum, representative of the work that we're doing here, that we are proud to share with you and to have you take back to your wonderful home. And just a reminder of our collegiality in this exchange of gifts. So again, thank you for the gift that you have given to all of us this evening. So three books representing some of our work. With that, I thank all of you for your participation this evening, and we look forward to seeing you again. And as Ronald referenced, I would just remind you that as we are commemorating and celebrating the month of Anne Frank, we are featuring the hologram, the interactive survivor hologram of Eva Schloss. And so we do hope that if you haven't yet seen it, and we just debuted it, it is the world debut of this hologram that started here on June 1st. So please come back and see us throughout the month of June. And it will rotate thereafter, but at intervals. So if you can, please join us in June. Thank you.